Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
The storm hit hard that night, smearing the windshield with rain so thick it looked like sheets of liquid steel. Thomas Wells gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup tighter, squinting through the blur of wipers as he navigated the winding mountain roads. His shift at the lumber yard had ended hours ago, but delays and a busted tire had pushed him into driving through a treacherous storm, miles from home. His gas gauge flickered dangerously near empty. Cursing under his breath, Thomas scanned the roadside, desperate for a station. Towns were sparse in this part of Oregon, and it could be miles before he found another soul, let alone a pump. Just when he was about to resign himself to running dry, he saw it, a glowing sign, Lonnie's Gas and Service, flickering in the downpour like a dying star. He pulled into the cracked lot. A single ancient pump stood under a rusted canopy. The store behind it was a crumbling relic, its windows so grimy it was impossible to see inside. The place looked abandoned, but the open sign in the window still buzzed weakly. Thomas hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to find somewhere, anywhere else. But he didn't have that luxury. He stepped out into the rain, boots splashing in puddles, and unscrewed the gas cap. The pump wheezed and clunked as he squeezed the handle, coughing out gas in slow, miserable spurts. "Need a hand?" The voice made him jump. A man had appeared from the shadows by the store door, wearing a filthy blue coverall and a smile that didn't reach his hollow eyes. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the sickly yellow light, and something about the way he stood, too stiff, too deliberate, set Thomas's nerves on edge. "No thanks, just getting gas," Thomas said, forcing casualness into his voice. The attendant nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Thomas. The rain had stopped so suddenly that Thomas hadn't noticed until that moment. The air was still, heavy. Not a single cricket or frog chirped in the woods surrounding them. "You're not from around here," the man said, "just passing through." The pump clicked off, the tank full. Thomas fumbled in his wallet, but when he looked up, the man was gone. He turned back toward the truck and nearly collided with him. The attendant stood inches away, smiling wider now, teeth far too numerous for a human mouth. Thomas stumbled back, heart hammering. "Look, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" The man's voice was distorted, layered, like multiple people speaking through him. "No trouble here. Stay a while." Thomas backed toward his truck, but the world around him twisted. The canopy above seemed to elongate and bend like melting wax. The station was no longer a dilapidated building, but a blackened ruin, windows shattered, door hanging off its hinges. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Thomas lunged for his truck door, but when he wrenched it open, it wasn't his truck anymore. The inside was rotted, the seats clawed and torn, and something moved inside, something wet and breathing. He slammed the door shut and turned to run, but the landscape shifted again. The station was gone. He was standing in a dense forest, mist curling around the trees. Figures moved just beyond sight, shadows with human shapes but twisted, broken. Thomas stumbled forward, heart jackhammering in his chest. His breath steamed out in short, desperate gasps. The shadows circled him, whispering his name. He broke into a sprint, not caring where he was going, only needing to get away. The mist thickened, swallowing him. Shapes loomed out of it, faces screaming in silent agony, hands reaching. Thomas tripped over something solid and fell hard onto the wet ground. When he pushed himself up, he found he was kneeling before a burned-out sign, the letters barely legible, Lonnie's Gas and Service. It hadn't been abandoned. It had been destroyed. Long ago. A low, rumbling laugh echoed around him, and the air grew colder. He turned and saw the attendant, or what was left of him. His body was a blackened skeleton wrapped in charred flesh, his mouth a gaping maw that stretched impossibly wide. "You can't leave," it said. "You're part of it now." Thomas scrambled backward, but unseen hands seized his ankles, dragging him toward the creature. He kicked and thrashed, tearing free, and ran again, blind in the mist. His mind raced, trying to understand. The gas station was a trap, a lure for the lost, the desperate. He needed to find the road. If he could just get back to the road, lights appeared through the mist ahead. Headlights. Thomas barreled toward them, screaming for help. A car, An old Crown Victoria idled on the cracked asphalt, its driver a woman with kind, weary eyes. She leaned across the seat, opening the passenger door. "Get in!" she shouted. Without thinking, Thomas dove in, slamming the door behind him. As the car roared to life and peeled away, he looked back. The gas station was there again, whole and intact, the attendant standing beneath the canopy, watching. "You're lucky," the woman said, not taking her eyes off the road. "Most don't get away." Thomas sat in stunned silence, drenched and shivering. What is that place?" "A graveyard," she said. "A graveyard for the forgotten, the ones who get lost in storms or on lonely roads. It feeds on fear, traps your soul so it never moves on." Thomas looked at her, realizing something was off. Her hands on the steering wheel were too pale, almost translucent. His heart sank. "You didn't get away, did you?" he whispered. She smiled sadly. "No, but I can still help others. A little." The car shuddered and began to flicker like a bad transmission. Thomas clutched the seat, panic rising. "Hold on," the woman said. "You're almost there." The mist thickened again, and then, with a jolt that nearly threw him from the seat, Thomas found himself standing on a dark, empty road. No car. No woman. Only the howling wind and the distant rumble of thunder. His truck sat idling a few yards away, headlights slicing through the rain. Shaking, Thomas stumbled toward it. He jumped in, slammed the door, and peeled away without looking back. He didn't stop driving until the sun began to rise, painting the sky with weary light. When he finally reached his home, he parked the truck, climbed into bed without even changing his soaked clothes, and fell into a fitful sleep. He never spoke of Lonnie's gas and service, never told anyone what he'd seen that night. But sometimes, when storms roll in and the roads turn slick and treacherous, Thomas dreams of mist and shadowy figures and the burned-out sign rising out of the fog. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of those dreams, a voice calls his name, patient and hungry, waiting for him to come back.
Story number 2.
The Langston Hotel sat on the farthest edge of Maple Ridge, a small forgotten town where fog clung to the streets like a second skin, and the air always smelled faintly of something rotting. No one remembered exactly when the hotel had closed, but everyone in town remembered why. Guests vanished. Some said it was the river that dragged them away. Others whispered about darker things, the kind that slithered unseen through the narrow hallways. Samantha Cole wasn't from Maple Ridge. She was a journalist chasing a story, the sort of story that would get her name in bigger newspapers than the ones she currently wrote for. She didn't believe in ghost stories. She believed in facts. So when her editor handed her the Langston Hotel assignment, she drove the 7 hours north without a second thought. The first thing that struck her when she pulled into the cracked, overgrown lot was how wrong the hotel felt. It was a towering, skeletal structure wrapped in ivy and shadows. Its once grand windows were boarded up, and the front doors hung lopsided on rusted hinges. But what unnerved her more was the silence. Not a bird, not a cricket, just the crunch of her boots on the gravel. She set up her gear quickly, camera, audio recorder, flashlight. She wasn't planning to stay the night. Just get enough footage, maybe a few atmospheric quotes from the townsfolk, and get out before sunset. But when she tried to record her opening piece in front of the hotel, her camera shut off by itself. Twice. Grumbling under her breath, she pulled out her phone to take a few shots. The screen flickered, then died completely, though the battery had been full a moment before. "You have to go inside to get the real story," a voice said. Samantha spun around. An old man leaned against a tree at the edge of the lot. His clothes were from another era, threadbare suspenders, muddy boots. His eyes, though, were bright and sharp. "You a guest, mister?" she asked, trying to mask her unease. He chuckled, a sound like dry leaves scraping over pavement. Not anymore. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and disappeared into the woods. Samantha took a breath and squared her shoulders. Fear was good for a story, she reminded herself. Fear sold papers. She pushed open the front door, the hinges screaming in protest. The air inside was thick with mildew and something sweeter, something like decay. Her flashlight barely pierced the gloom. Peeling wallpaper sagged from the walls. A broken chandelier dangled overhead like a noose made of glass. She moved cautiously through the lobby, documenting the crumbling front desk, the torn furniture. Her recorder hissed with static, picking up faint whispers she couldn't make out. She told herself it was interference. Old buildings had weird acoustics. Still, she shivered. The grand staircase yawned ahead of her, the banister broken in places like snapped bones. Against her better judgment, Samantha ascended, the stairs groaning beneath her weight. On the second floor, the hallways stretched in both directions, endless and dark. She picked a room at random, room 217. The door was ajar. Inside, the furniture was coated with dust, but the bed was made, the sheets pristine and tucked with military precision. A suitcase sat at the foot of the bed, old-fashioned leather with brass buckles. The air grew colder. Samantha approached the suitcase. The initials MW were embossed on the handle. She flipped the latches open. Inside were neatly folded clothes, men's suits from decades past, and a framed photograph. She lifted it out carefully. It showed a man and a woman standing in front of the Langston Hotel. The man's face was scratched out violently, the glass spider-webbed with cracks, the door slammed shut behind her. Samantha whipped around, heart pounding. The handle rattled as if someone on the other side was trying to get in, or keep her inside. She rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was gone. In its place stretched a corridor she hadn't seen before, narrow, suffocating, its walls pressed close with peeling floral wallpaper that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Faint, childlike giggles echoed down its length. She backed away, breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The suitcase fell from the bed with a heavy thud. The photograph landed face up on the floor. In the picture, the woman's face was now slashed out too. Samantha bolted. She sprinted down the twisted corridor, the walls bending and shifting around her. Doors appeared and disappeared, opening just enough to glimpse horrors inside. Eyeless faces peering back, bodies hanging from ceilings, hands clawing at unseen barriers. Her flashlight sputtered and died. The darkness was absolute. She staggered forward blindly, hands outstretched. Her fingers brushed something warm and wet. She recoiled, stumbling backward into unseen arms. A voice rasped in her ear, "Stay." Samantha screamed and tore free. She slammed into a door that gave way under her weight, tumbling into what must have once been the ballroom. Moonlight spilled in through a gaping hole in the roof, revealing a scene frozen in nightmare. Figures danced across the floor, half-rotted corpses dressed in tattered finery. They twirled and spun in grotesque parody of life, their faces slack and grinning. An unseen orchestra played a discordant waltz. The dancers turned toward her as one. She ran. Through the ballroom, down endless halls, always hearing the scrape of feet behind her, the whispered promises of those who had stayed too long. She didn't know how long she ran. Minutes, hours. But finally she saw it. The front door. Freedom. She burst through it, gasping in the fresh, damp air of the outside world. Behind her, the hotel loomed, silent and waiting. Her truck was still there, untouched. She scrambled inside, locking the doors. The engine roared to life on the first try. As she peeled out of the lot, she caught one last glimpse of the old man standing by the tree. He smiled, tipping an invisible hat. The drive back to town was a blur. Samantha didn't stop until she reached a diner on the edge of Maple Ridge. She stumbled inside, still shaking. The waitress gave her a curious look but said nothing, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a small, knowing smile. Samantha forced a laugh. "Something like that." An old man sitting nearby turned to her. "You been to the Langston?" She nodded mutely. "Used to be a fine place," he said, voice rough, "till they opened up that third floor." She frowned. "I didn't go to the third floor." The diner went silent. Every face turned toward her. "There is no third floor," the old man said softly. "There never was." The blood drained from her face. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the coffee cup. That night, in her motel room, Samantha played back the audio from her recorder. At first, it was only static. Then, faintly, she heard it. Her own voice, distorted and slow. "Stay, stay, stay." She threw the recorder across the room. She left Maple Ridge the next morning, the town vanishing into her rearview mirror. But she never stopped looking over her shoulder. Never stopped checking her rearview mirror. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right and the shadows creep too close, she can hear it again. A waltz, a laugh, a voice whispering, "You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave."
Story number 3.
Rain beat against the sidewalk in fat, cold drops as Jordan Finch waited under the awning of a closed coffee shop, phone clutched tight in his hand. His Uber was taking forever, the little car icon on the app spinning in slow, frustrating circles. Midnight had come and gone, and the streets of downtown Portland were nearly empty, the city washed in a mix of fog and neon. The screen finally blinked with a message, "Driver arrived." A black sedan pulled up to the curb, headlights cutting through the rain. Jordan squinted at the license plate. It matched. He tugged his jacket tighter around himself and jogged to the car. The back door swung open without him touching it. He hesitated, every instinct in his body screaming, "Wait!" But the rain was getting heavier, and he just wanted to get home. He slid into the back seat. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something else, an acrid, metallic scent he couldn't quite place. The driver didn't turn around, just nodded at the road ahead. "You, Jordan?" the driver asked, voice low and rough like gravel under boots. "Yeah," Jordan said, uneasy. The driver said nothing more. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, gliding down the deserted street. Jordan glanced at the driver's profile in the rearview mirror. His face was mostly hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap pulled low, but there was something wrong with his skin, too smooth, too waxy, like a mannequin pretending to be human. "Busy night?" Jordan asked, trying to dispel the oppressive silence. The driver didn't answer. The car took a turn Jordan didn't recognize. "Hey, I think you missed the turn for the highway," he said, voice tight. The driver remained silent, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles, if they were knuckles, seemed to bulge unnaturally. Jordan checked his phone. No signal. The Uber app was frozen on the loading screen. "Seriously, man, where are we going?" The driver tilted his head just a fraction, and for a moment Jordan thought he heard something, whispering. Dozens of voices, chattering at the edge of hearing. He reached for the door handle. It wouldn't move. "Let me out," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'll pay you, whatever. Just let me out here." The driver made a sound, a low, gurgling chuckle that seemed to come from deep within his chest. The city had disappeared. They were driving through an industrial wasteland now, abandoned warehouses, broken streetlights flickering weakly in the rain. It felt like another world, like they'd slipped through some invisible crack into a place that looked like Earth but wasn't. Jordan pounded on the window. "Let me out!" The driver didn't even flinch. Then Jordan saw it, his own reflection in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't right. His reflection was smiling, a wide, cruel grin stretched across its face, teeth too sharp, eyes too black. Jordan recoiled, heart hammering. The car slowed and pulled into a crumbling parking garage. The concrete pillars loomed like ancient monoliths, their surfaces slick with rain and grime. The driver stopped the car and killed the engine. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain hammering the roof like nails. The driver turned around slowly. In the dim light, Jordan saw him clearly for the first time. The driver's face was a mask of flesh, stitched together from different skins. The mouth was wrong, too wide, too red, and the eyes were deep, bottomless pits. Jordan kicked the door with everything he had. It popped open with a groan, and he tumbled onto the wet concrete. Scrambling to his feet, he sprinted toward the exit, footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Behind him, the driver got out of the car. He didn't run. He simply walked. Slow, steady, inevitable. Jordan's lungs burned as he tore through the garage. Every door he tried was locked. His phone was dead. His mind screamed at him to move faster, to get away. Ahead, he saw a stairwell door slightly ajar, swinging in the wind. He barreled through it, slamming it behind him, and pounded up the steps, the rusted metal slick and treacherous under his shoes. The stairwell twisted impossibly, climbing higher and higher without end, the concrete walls growing narrower, pressing in on him. The whispering voices grew louder. He stumbled onto a landing and froze. There was no way forward. The stairwell ended abruptly at a brick wall. Behind him, he heard the door creak open. Jordan turned, every nerve ending screaming. The driver stood there, head tilted, mouth yawning open wider and wider until it split his face in half. From that gaping maw spilled something black and writhing, tendrils of smoke or shadow that slithered across the floor toward Jordan. In a blind panic, Jordan slammed his fists against the wall. It cracked under his blows, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Without thinking, he squeezed through the gap, tearing his jacket and scraping his skin raw. He found himself in a hallway lined with doors. Each door was marked with a number, but they weren't normal numbers. They twisted and writhed as he looked at them, shifting into strange symbols that hurt his eyes. The whispering was deafening now. One door at the end of the hall stood slightly open, golden light spilling from the crack. Jordan sprinted for it. As he ran, the doors on either side burst open one by one, and things poured out. Things that looked like people but moved wrong, their joints bending the wrong way, their mouths gaping in silent screams. Jordan threw himself at the golden-lit door. He tumbled through, and the world changed. He was back outside, standing under the awning of the coffee shop. The rain had stopped. The city was alive again, cars passing, people laughing on the sidewalks. Jordan gasped for breath, clutching his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket. New Uber notification, driver arriving. He flinched and looked up. A different car was pulling to the curb, bright blue, not black. A woman smiled at him through the window, waving. Cautiously, Jordan approached. He checked the plate. It matched. He checked the app. Everything matched. He got in. The woman smiled warmly. Rough night? You have no idea, Jordan said hoarsely. As they drove away, he glanced back at the coffee shop. The black sedan was still there, sitting in the shadows. And in the backseat he could swear he saw his reflection, still smiling that impossible, cruel smile, waving goodbye. He never used Uber again. But sometimes late at night, when the rain falls just right and the world feels thinner, he'll glance at his phone and see a notification he didn't summon. Driver arriving, and a chill will crawl up his spine. Because he knows that somewhere out there the driver is still waiting, still hunting, still whispering, stay.
Story number 4.
The rain was relentless that night, a steady hiss against the windshield as Elena Foster pulled into the massive Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of town. Her shift at the hospital had ended late, and this was the only store still open. The parking lot was almost empty, the bright lights buzzing overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement. Elena grabbed her umbrella and hurried inside. She needed only a few things, milk, bread, cereal, but the moment she crossed the threshold, a strange heaviness settled over her, as if the air itself resisted her presence. The store was nearly deserted. Only a few employees shuffled about, restocking shelves and pretending not to notice her. The aisles seemed longer than usual, stretching into darkened horizons where the flickering fluorescent lights barely reached. She shook off the feeling and pushed her cart toward the grocery section. As she turned down the first aisle, she noticed a woman standing halfway down, facing away from her. The woman was motionless, her long black hair hanging wet and stringy over her shoulders, a tattered gray coat clinging to her thin frame. Elena slowed, a chill prickling her skin. The woman didn't move. "Excuse me," Elena said softly, trying to ease past. The woman didn't react. Elena gave her a wide berth and hurried down the aisle. When she reached the end and glanced back, the aisle was empty. The woman was gone. She chalked it up to exhaustion. 12-hour shifts were starting to mess with her mind. In the dairy section, Elena opened a cooler door and reached for a gallon of milk. As her hand closed around it, she caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass. A shape standing directly behind her, tall, thin, impossibly still. Heart hammering, she whirled around. Nothing. The store seemed even quieter now, the silence almost deafening, broken only by the occasional, distant beep of a scanner. She hurried through the rest of her shopping, trying to ignore the feeling of unseen eyes tracking her every move. At checkout, she found no cashiers, only self-service machines lined up like silent sentinels. As she scanned her items, she noticed something wrong on the monitor. Instead of the usual prompts, a message scrolled across the screen in jagged red letters. "Don't look away." Her throat tightened. She spun around instinctively. Still no one. When she turned back to the screen, her reflection stared at her. But it wasn't her. The woman from the aisle stood behind her reflection, smiling with a mouth too wide, her eyes hollow and black. Elena stumbled away from the kiosk, leaving her groceries behind. She bolted for the exit, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own ragged breathing. The automatic doors didn't open. She smashed her hands against them, desperate, but they remained stubbornly closed. Behind her, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. She turned. The store had changed. The bright, sterile lights were gone. The aisles were bathed in dim, sickly yellow light. Products on the shelves melted and twisted, their labels running like ink in the rain. The floor rippled like the surface of a black lake, and the woman was there. Closer now. Her face was wrong. Skin pale and stretched too thin, mouth torn up to her ears, rows of broken, jagged teeth glinting in the light. Her hands were blackened, fingers too long and ending in nails like razors. Elena backed away, searching frantically for another exit. The woman lunged. Elena sprinted down an aisle, feet slipping on the wet, warped floor. The shelves seemed to close in on her, tightening like a throat. She swerved into the electronics section, knocking over displays. In the flickering TV screens, she saw the woman following, appearing closer in each frame, even when Elena couldn't hear her steps. She burst through into the back rooms, the area marked employees only. Corridors stretched in endless loops, the walls lined with doors that led to nowhere. The air was thick and hot, buzzing with broken fluorescent lights. The whispering started then, dozens of voices, all hissing her name. Elena. Elena, stay. She staggered forward, driven by blind panic. She tried door after door, locked, stuck, or opening, only to reveal walls of black, rotting meat. Finally, one door creaked open. A stairwell spiraled downward, impossibly deep. A foul wind rose from below, carrying the stench of earth and blood. She had no choice. She descended. Each step seemed to sap her strength. The walls pressed tighter, the lights grew dimmer, the whispering grew louder until it felt like 1,000 cold hands pawing at her mind. At the bottom was a single, round room, the floor slick with something dark and viscous. In the center stood the woman, waiting. "Why are you doing this?" Elena screamed, voice breaking. The woman only smiled wider, that grotesque, broken grin splitting her face nearly in half. Behind her, shadowy figures emerged from the walls, half-formed bodies, faces frozen in expressions of terror. They circled Elena, whispering in tongues she couldn't understand. Elena closed her eyes. She remembered something her grandmother once said, that fear gave them power. Fear was the invitation. She forced herself to breathe, to push the terror down. When she opened her eyes, the woman hesitated. Elena stepped forward. "You're not real," she said, voice shaking but steady. "You're just a bad memory." The woman's smile faltered. The shadow figures hissed, recoiling slightly. "You don't control me," Elena said, louder now. The woman's body began to twitch and convulse, her form distorting as if unseen hands were trying to rip her apart. The walls of the room cracked, light bleeding through. Elena ran. She sprinted up the stairs, the walls crumbling around her. She burst through a door and found herself back in the Walmart, now lit by harsh, normal fluorescent lights. The store was silent, empty. The exit doors slid open with a cheerful beep. Elena didn't stop until she was in her car, doors locked, hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. When she finally looked back, the Walmart stood there, quiet and still under the rain. Normal. She drove home without looking back again. But that night, when she emptied her shopping bag, she found something she hadn't bought, a cracked, dirty mirror, small enough to fit in her palm. In its reflection, for the briefest moment, she saw the woman smiling back at her.
Story number 5.
The highway stretched endlessly ahead, black and slick under the heavy storm clouds. Mason Briggs leaned forward over the wheel of his 18-wheeler, squinting through the rain. He was hauling a load of steel beams across 3 states on a deadline he already knew he'd miss. It was just him, the storm, and the open road, a familiar, lonely rhythm. The radio had gone to static an hour ago, and his phone hadn't had a signal since he left the last town. Somewhere in the empty countryside of northern Montana, surrounded by fields of dead corn and forests so dense they seemed to breathe, Mason was utterly alone. Or so he thought. It started with the lights, a flicker at the edge of his vision. He thought at first it was lightning, but when he glanced in the side mirror, he caught a glimpse of headlights, too close, weaving erratically behind him. Mason grunted and tapped the brake lightly, signaling the car to pass. But when he looked again, there was nothing there. Just the sheets of rain and the endless, empty highway. He shook his head. Lack of sleep. Maybe he'd been on the road too long. He needed coffee, a break, a moment to breathe. The next truck stop was 50 miles away. He pressed on. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time was slippery in the dark. And then he saw it again. Headlights, flashing this time. Closer. Too close. Mason gripped the wheel tighter. He couldn't afford a wreck out here. He signaled, pulled a little to the shoulder to let the car pass. But again, nothing. No car, no lights. Just the storm. His skin prickled. Something was wrong. The CB radio crackled to life suddenly, hissing and popping with static. Through the noise, a voice whispered, "Stop the truck." Mason froze. He hadn't touched the radio. He hadn't heard a soul for hours. Another burst of static, and the voice came again, louder, more urgent. "Stop the truck before it's too late." His heart pounded. He stared at the road ahead, nothing but darkness and rain. He reached for the CB, but as his fingers brushed the mic, a shadow darted across the highway just ahead. Tall, impossibly thin, moving on all fours like a spider, but fast. So fast, he barely registered it before it was gone. The truck shuddered as it rolled over something. Mason slammed on the brakes, heart in his throat. The massive vehicle screamed in protest, skidding sideways across the slick asphalt before finally coming to a stop. He sat there, gasping, hands locked on the wheel. In the mirrors, the world was black, nothing but his own headlights cutting weakly through the rain. Then he saw it, standing in the middle of the road behind him, a figure. Man-shaped, but wrong. Its arms were too long, its legs bowed outward like a broken puppet. The face, or what he thought was a face, was pale and smooth like stretched wax with hollow pits where eyes should have been. It stood perfectly still, waiting. Mason fumbled for the gear shift, throwing the rig into drive. He didn't care what it was. He wasn't sticking around to find out. The truck roared forward, tires screaming against the wet road. He didn't look back. He couldn't. But the feeling of being watched crawled up his spine like ice. He drove for what felt like forever. The rain unending, the road never changing. And then he saw lights up ahead. A truck stop. Oasis in the storm. He pulled in hard, the rig growling in protest, and parked haphazardly by the pumps. The place was old, barely maintained. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead. Mason stumbled out of the cab, legs trembling, and headed toward the diner attached to the station. The inside was warmer, but not by much. A handful of truckers nursed coffees and stared at the greasy tables. An old waitress with a 1,000-yard stare poured him a cup without asking. "You look like you've seen the devil himself," she said. "Maybe I have." Mason muttered, hands still shaking. He tried to explain, to tell them about the lights, the voice, the thing on the road, but the truckers just nodded solemnly as if they'd heard it all before. One of them, an older man with a gray beard and a battered hat, spoke. "You're on Old Route 6, son?" Mason nodded. "Yeah. How'd you know?" The old man leaned forward, voice low. "You're lucky you stopped. Most don't. They keep driving, and they never come back." Mason swallowed hard. "What is it?" The old man shrugged. "No one knows. Some say it's the ghost of a wrecked driver, damned to wander the highway forever. Some say it's something older, something that's always been here. Feeding?" Mason whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "It gets inside your head, makes you see things, hear things. If you don't stop, if you don't get out, it pulls you into its world, and once you're in, you don't come out." Mason sat back heavily. His reflection in the diner window caught his eye. At first, it looked normal. Then he noticed the reflection smiling. He wasn't. The smile grew wider, the mouth tearing at the edges, blackness spilling from the eyes. Mason jerked his head away. When he looked again, it was just him. Sweating, trembling, alive. The waitress touched his arm gently. "You need to rest, Han. We got a room out back. Stay the night, leave in the morning." He didn't argue. The room was small, cramped, but dry. Mason bolted the door and shoved a chair under the knob for good measure. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Sometime after midnight, he woke to a sound. Tapping at the window, slow, deliberate, almost playful. Mason squeezed his eyes shut. "It's not real. It's not real." The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Then a voice. "Mason, open the window." It was his own voice, soft, pleading. "Mason, let me in." Tears burned his eyes. He stayed silent. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. Then, screaming. An inhuman wail that shook the glass and rattled the door. Mason sat up, heart hammering. The door handle jiggled violently. Something slammed against the door, hard enough to crack the wood. He grabbed his boots, yanked them on, and burst out through the bathroom window, landing hard in the mud outside. The parking lot was deserted. His rig sat alone, mist curling around its massive tires. He sprinted for it, not daring to look behind him. As he climbed into the cab, he saw something moving in the diner window. Something tall, thin, waving, smiling. Mason floored it. He didn't stop until the sun was high and the rain had vanished. He made it to the next town, booked a room in a busy motel, and locked himself inside. For weeks, he didn't drive. Couldn't. When he finally returned to the road, he avoided Old Route 6 like it was cursed. Because maybe it was. He heard stories later, other truckers vanishing without a trace, wrecks found empty, the cargo untouched. CB radios crackling with voices that weren't human. Mason knew better than to dismiss them. Late at night, on lonely stretches of highway, he sometimes caught a glimpse in his mirrors, a figure standing just beyond the reach of his taillights, watching, waiting. And he knew the rules now. Don't stop, don't listen, and whatever you do, don't look back.
Story number 6.
The woods always seemed different at night, especially deep in the Bitterroot Mountains where the trees grew so thick they swallowed the moonlight whole. Beth Carter adjusted her backpack and tightened the straps on her headlamp, the cold mountain air biting at her cheeks. Her friends, Mark and Jen, were a few yards ahead, their laughter cutting through the otherwise silent forest as they searched for a place to set up camp. It had been Mark's idea, a weekend off-grid, no phones, no GPS, no contact with civilization. Beth had agreed because she needed the break, needed to forget everything back home. But now, as the last traces of daylight disappeared and the path became little more than an animal trail, she wasn't so sure. They found a clearing near a creek, ringed by towering pines that loomed like silent sentinels. By the time they pitched their tents and built a fire, night had truly fallen. The flames crackled and spat embers into the dark, the only light for miles. Beth tried to relax. They cooked hot dogs over the fire, told dumb jokes, and passed around a bottle of whiskey to keep the cold at bay. But even as she laughed along, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods were too quiet, no crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. When Beth mentioned it, Mark shrugged. Probably just the cold. Animals hunker down this time of year. Jen nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Around midnight, they finally crawled into their tents. Beth lay awake listening to the fire die down, her sleeping bag pulled up to her chin. Every so often, she thought she heard footsteps crunching outside. Too deliberate to be the wind, too slow to be a deer. She told herself it was her imagination. Sometime later, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke to the sound of whispering. At first, she thought it was Mark and Jen talking outside, but the whispers were wrong. Overlapping voices, speaking too fast in a language she couldn't understand. They circled her tent, moving just beyond the thin nylon walls. Beth froze, her heart hammering. She heard the zipper on her tent jiggle ever so slightly. Slowly, she reached for the flashlight beside her. The whispering grew louder. Then, without warning, everything went silent. So silent that her own breathing sounded deafening. She waited, every muscle locked in fear. After what felt like an eternity, she heard Mark call out from his tent. "You guys hear that?" Jen's voice was shaky. "Yeah. What the hell is it?" Beth found her voice. "Something's out there." Mark unzipped his tent. Beth heard his boots crunch over the pine needles. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dull red glow. Mark swung his flashlight around the clearing. It cut through the mist that had crept up from the creek, illuminating only trees and fog. "Probably just animals," he said, though he didn't sound sure. That's when they heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from the tree line. Beth scrambled out of her tent, clutching her flashlight like a weapon. Jen joined her, pale and wide-eyed. The three of them stood together, backs to the dying fire, facing the forest. The growling stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then something charged from the trees, fast, heavy, snapping branches as it came. Mark shouted, raising his flashlight, but there was nothing there. The sound vanished mid-stride, like whatever it was had evaporated. Beth's skin crawled. It felt like they were being toyed with. "We should go back to the cars," she said, voice trembling. They agreed. Quickly packed only essentials, flashlights, knives, anything they could grab fast, and abandoned the rest. The trail back was barely visible, and the mist had thickened into a dense, choking fog. They hadn't gone more than a few hundred yards when Beth realized the woods had changed. The trail twisted in impossible ways, looping back on itself. Trees leaned in, branches gnarled like grasping hands. Every direction looked the same. The whispering returned, louder now, weaving through the fog. Panic gnawed at her. They tried to stay together, calling out landmarks, but the trees seemed to shift when they weren't looking. The mist played tricks, shapes moving just out of reach. Beth tripped over a root and hit the ground hard. When she looked up, she was alone. "Mark! Jen!" she screamed. No answer, just whispering. Beth stumbled to her feet, shining her light wildly around. Shadows darted between the trees, tall, thin figures that moved unnaturally, jerking like broken puppets. One of them stepped into the beam of her flashlight. It was human-shaped but wrong, all elongated limbs and a featureless face, pale as bone. It cocked its head, studying her with an alien curiosity. Beth turned and ran. The forest closed in around her. Branches snagged her jacket and hair, ripping at her like claws. She didn't know where she was going, only away. She burst into another clearing and froze. Mark and Jen stood there, or what was left of them. Their faces were blank, their mouths slack. They stood side by side, arms hanging limply, staring at her with empty eyes. Blood dripped from deep gashes across their torsos, pooling at their feet. Beth backed away, heart in her throat. The whispering grew deafening. The shadows circled her, moving faster now, laughing in a language that scraped against her mind. From the trees emerged a figure taller than the others, wearing a twisted crown of branches. Its arms stretched impossibly long, and from its fingers hung scraps of flesh. Beth knew, without being told, that it was the thing that ruled this place. The woods didn't just hide it, they were it. The crowned figure raised one clawed hand and the forest responded. Roots burst from the ground, wrapping around Beth's ankles and wrists, dragging her to her knees. The crowned thing approached, its hollow face inches from hers. Beth summoned every ounce of willpower she had left. She closed her eyes and remembered the old stories her grandmother used to tell. Tales of forest spirits, old as the earth, bound by rules even they couldn't break. She spoke, voice trembling but clear. "I do not belong to you." The whispering faltered. "I am not yours," she said again louder. The crowned figure recoiled slightly, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Beth pressed on, chanting words she barely remembered, old words in an older tongue, ones meant to sever ties between the living and the spirits of the wild. The roots slackened. The crowned figure screamed, a sound that wasn't sound at all, but a force that shook the ground and split the trees. Beth wrenched free and ran. The forest twisted and fought to hold her, but she forced her way through, following the dim outline of the creek. She stumbled into a dirt road just as the first gray light of dawn broke through the mist. Behind her, the woods seethed and roared, but they couldn't cross the threshold of the road. Beth collapsed on the gravel, sobbing. Hours later, a search party found her. She never spoke about what she saw. Mark and Jen's bodies were never found, but sometimes, on cold nights when the mist is thick, Beth dreams of the crowned figure and wakes with scratches she can't explain. And she knows the woods are still waiting, still hungry, still whispering her name.
Story number 7.
The highway stretched out before Daniel West like a river of black glass, glinting under the anemic light of the moon. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the endless hum of the tires, the only sound against the heavy silence of midnight. He was deep into the northern stretches of Route 84, miles away from any town, gas station, or sign of life. It was the kind of place that swallowed you whole if your car broke down. Daniel wasn't worried. His Dodge Charger was reliable and he had a full tank of gas. He just needed to reach Marlowe by morning to close a deal that could save his struggling business. A few more hours of this lonely drive and he'd be there. The night was heavy with mist, curling over the asphalt like ghostly fingers. Daniel flipped on the high beams. Ahead, the road seemed to ripple under the fog, as if reality itself was bending. He shook it off. Lack of sleep could do that. He reached for the coffee in the cup holder, only to find it ice cold. Irritated, he tossed it into the passenger seat. That's when he saw the figure, standing right in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched in protest, the car fishtailing before coming to a shuddering halt just feet from the figure. He sat there, heart pounding, staring through the windshield. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. She wore a tattered white dress that clung to her thin frame. Her hair was long, black, matted with what looked like dirt or something darker. Her face was obscured by the hair, head hanging at an unnatural angle. She didn't move. Daniel honked the horn. The woman didn't react. He debated what to do. Leaving someone stranded out here went against every instinct he had. But something about her, the utter stillness, the wrongness, made his skin crawl. Reluctantly, he cracked the window. "Hey, are you okay?" he called. The woman twitched, a jerky, inhuman motion. Then she slowly raised her head. Through the veil of her hair, Daniel caught a glimpse of her face and froze. Her eyes were hollow sockets, black and empty. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, the skin around it torn and bloody as if she'd been clawing at it herself. Daniel threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on the slick road. The woman took a step forward. The headlights flickered. The car sputtered. Panic surged through him. He twisted the key trying to restart the engine, but it whined uselessly. He looked up, and she was gone. The road ahead was empty. For a long moment, Daniel sat there, breathing hard, scanning the mist-choked road. Then the engine roared back to life on its own. Without thinking, he slammed it into drive and sped forward. He pushed the Charger faster than he ever had, the speedometer needle climbing, the trees on either side of the highway blurring into dark smears. He just had to get out of this stretch, just a few more miles. In the rearview mirror, he saw her, sitting in the back seat. Her bloody face was inches from the glass, grinning. Daniel screamed and swerved violently, the car veering onto the shoulder. He fought the wheel, pulling it back onto the road. The mirror shattered with a deafening pop, shards raining down like deadly snowflakes. When he dared glance back, the backseat was empty. But the damage was done. His heart raced out of control, sweat poured down his face, and his mind spun in dizzy circles. He needed help. Up ahead, a sign loomed out of the fog. Pine Hollow Rest Area, 1 mile. Relief flooded him. A place to stop, to breathe, to figure out what the hell was happening. He took the exit. The rest area was deserted. Just a few broken-down picnic tables, an old vending machine, and a bathroom shack with a single flickering light above the door. Daniel parked under the light, unwilling to sit in darkness. He stepped out of the car, the cool night air soaking through his clothes. He half ran to the bathroom, kicking open the door. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed and sputtered. The place stank of mildew and something metallic. Blood, his mind supplied helpfully. He splashed cold water on his face, gripping the sink until his knuckles turned white. When he looked up into the mirror, his reflection grinned at him. Not a normal grin, a horrific, twisted leer that split his face like a wound. He stumbled back with a cry. Behind his reflection, the woman stood, inches from his shoulder. He whirled around. The bathroom was empty. But the walls were wrong. They pulsed as if breathing, covered in dark, wet handprints that hadn't been there before. The door slammed shut. Daniel ran to it, yanking at the handle. Locked. The light flickered and died. He was plunged into darkness. The whispering started then. Soft at first, barely more than a breeze against his ear. Then louder. Hissing, accusing, angry. You left us. You let us die. You belong here now. Daniel screamed and slammed his fists against the door. No answer. The whispers swarmed over him, suffocating, pulling him down into a pit of memories he had long buried. Memories of an accident years ago when he had been a young, reckless man who thought he could outrun anything. A night of drinking, a wrong turn, a crash, 3 dead, 1 survivor, him. He had run from the wreck, had never looked back. Now they had found him. The floor beneath him shifted, growing sticky, pulling at his shoes. From the darkness, hands reached out, cold, skeletal hands dragging him down. Daniel fought, screaming, thrashing, but the hands were relentless. In a last desperate surge, he kicked the door with everything he had. It burst open. He tumbled into the parking lot, gasping. The light above the bathroom blinked steadily, innocent again. His car sat where he'd left it, but the back seat was not empty. He could see her silhouette through the cracked windshield. Waiting. Daniel staggered to the car, got in, and locked the doors. He didn't dare look in the mirror, didn't dare turn around. He started the engine and peeled out of the rest area, tires shrieking. Back on the highway, the mist had thickened, turning the world into a tunnel of gray. He drove blindly, adrenaline the only thing keeping him upright. The radio crackled to life, a soft static at first, then a voice. A child's voice. "Come back," it pleaded. "No," Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face. The static deepened into laughter, twisted, broken laughter that filled the car. The headlights caught movement ahead, a figure staggering in the middle of the road. Daniel swerved, missing it by inches. More figures appeared, shambling from the woods on either side, blocking the road. He had no choice. He plowed through them. The Charger jolted as if it hitting solid flesh, but when Daniel looked in the mirror, there were no bodies. Just the endless mist swallowing the road behind him. The laughter faded, the mist thinned. Dawn broke over the horizon, and Daniel found himself pulling into Marlowe. He parked the car on Main Street, shaking, filthy, exhausted beyond words. When he finally dared glance into the rearview mirror, he saw only himself. No woman, no twisted grin, just a man broken by what he had seen. But as he stepped out onto the sidewalk, he caught a flash of white in the corner of his eye. A woman in a tattered dress watching him from an alleyway. waiting. Daniel turned away. He knew he could never escape them. He could only run.
Story number 8.
The sky over Miller's Hollow bled a deep, heavy red as the sun sank behind the crooked line of bare trees. Emma Cross gripped the steering wheel tighter as her rusted pickup bounced over the rutted dirt road leading to the old Miller farm. She hated coming out here, hated everything about this forgotten corner of Ohio where nothing but crows and dust seemed to live. But she owed her Uncle Sam, and after his sudden death, she was the only one left to clear out the place before the bank swallowed it. The farmhouse rose out of the gloom, a gray skeleton of rotting wood and shattered windows. Beyond it stretched acres of ruined fields, the soil cracked and lifeless. Emma parked near the sagging front porch, the truck's engine coughing before dying with a final shudder. For a moment, she simply sat there, staring at the house, heart heavy with unease. A bitter wind stirred the brittle corn stalks that had somehow survived the harvest, whispering through the air like ghostly voices. Emma shook herself and grabbed her flashlight, stepping into the encroaching darkness. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of mold and something worse, something sweet and rotten. Dust choked the air and broken furniture was strewn across the floor. She moved carefully, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Pictures still hung crookedly on the walls, faded images of long-dead relatives who seemed to glare at her from their frames. The stairs creaked as she made her way to the second floor. Uncle Sam's bedroom was just as he had left it, the bed unmade, a Bible open on the nightstand. The pages fluttered, though there was no breeze. Emma picked it up. A passage was underlined in red ink. "Beware the fields of sorrow, for they hunger with a thirst no blood can sate." A chill traced its way down her spine. She set the Bible down and turned to leave. That's when she heard it. Footsteps on the porch below. Emma froze, listening. The steps were slow, deliberate, heavy. They creaked across the floorboards, each one a sharp stab in the oppressive silence. Whoever it was moved through the house, heading for the stairs. Emma killed her flashlight. Darkness swallowed her. She crouched low, heart thundering in her chest. The steps climbed the stairs one by one. In the dark, Emma reached blindly, finding a loose board beneath the bed. She gripped it like a club, every muscle tense. The footsteps reached the landing. Emma strained her eyes, but the darkness was too thick. She heard breathing. Deep, raspy, like something dragging breath through torn lungs. It passed her room. She waited, not daring to move. Then the breathing stopped. The air grew colder, so cold she could see her breath puffing in the darkness. Slowly, she turned on the flashlight, the weak beam trembling in her hand. The hallway was empty. Shaking, Emma stood and crept down the stairs, keeping close to the wall. The front door was ajar, swinging gently in the wind. She darted outside. The yard was empty. Only the dying light of the sunset and the whisper of the cornstalks remained. Emma forced herself to breathe. Probably a squatter, she told herself. Or just her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and grief. She headed back to the truck, ready to call it a night. That's when she noticed the scarecrow. It stood in the middle of the field, about 50 yards from the house. Emma didn't remember seeing it when she arrived. It was an unsettling figure. Taller than a man, dressed in ragged overalls and a sackcloth head stitched into a grotesque smile. Black crows perched on its outstretched arms, staring at her with gleaming eyes. Something about it made her skin crawl. As she watched, one of the crows cawed and flew away. The scarecrow's head turned, just slightly following it. Emma stumbled back. No, that wasn't possible. But when she looked again, the head faced her. The stitched grin seemed wider now, the arms drooping slightly as if it had begun to move. She fumbled for her truck keys. The engine refused to turn over. Again and again she twisted the ignition, panic rising. In the corner of her eye, movement. The scarecrow was closer, half the distance now. It hadn't walked, it hadn't needed to. The field around it seemed different. The soil blackened, steaming, the cornstalks withering and collapsing as it drew near. The crows took to the sky in a screaming frenzy. Emma abandoned the truck, running back toward the house. She slammed the door and bolted it, heart hammering. Through the broken window, she saw the scarecrow standing at the edge of the porch, the wood beneath it blackened and rotted. The house groaned. The lights flickered and died. Emma stumbled backward as the floorboards around the scarecrow began to decay, spreading rot through the house like veins. Whispers filled the air, angry, pleading, desperate. The Bible. She remembered the warning, "Beware the fields of sorrow." This was no ordinary scarecrow. It was something old, something summoned. Emma raced upstairs, the floor sagging dangerously beneath her feet. She found the Bible where she had left it, pages fluttering wildly. In the margin, beside the underlined verse, her uncle had scrawled a message: "Burn it, only fire can cleanse." Emma grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, smashing it on the ground and scooping up the oil. She soaked a heavy curtain, wrapping it around a broken chair leg. Outside, the front door exploded inward with a crash. The scarecrow entered. Emma lit the curtain with a match. The makeshift torch roared to life. The scarecrow paused at the foot of the stairs, its stitched mouth twisting as if in anger. Emma hurled the torch. It struck the scarecrow squarely in the chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the scarecrow ignited, flames licking hungrily at its sackcloth skin. It screamed, a terrible, unearthly sound that shook the house to its foundations. The walls blackened, the ceiling split. The very air seemed to warp. Emma didn't wait to see more. She bolted out the back door, sprinting across the dying field. Behind her, the farmhouse collapsed in on itself, a roaring inferno consuming it and the scarecrow within. The ground shuddered. The soil cracked open in great jagged lines, swallowing what remained of the cursed fields. Emma didn't stop running until she reached the main road, where she flagged down a passing trucker who stared at her with wide, horrified eyes. She didn't look back. Later, when the fire crews came, they found nothing but ashes where the Miller farmhouse had stood. No sign of a scarecrow, no sign of Emma's truck, only dead, blackened earth stretching as far as they could see. Emma left town that night and never returned. But sometimes, on lonely stretches of highway near Miller's Hollow, travelers report seeing a scarecrow standing at the edge of the fields, its stitched mouth grinning wide, black crows perched on its shoulders, waiting for someone else to wander too close, waiting for someone else to feed the fields.
Story number 9.
Officer Daniel Mercer had seen a lot during his 10 years on the force. Gruesome accidents, grisly crime scenes, things that stuck to the back of his mind no matter how hard he scrubbed. But nothing in his career prepared him for the call that came in at 2:13 a.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday. A disturbance reported at the old Greystone Asylum, abandoned for decades, rotting on the edge of town like a festering wound. Locals whispered about it but stayed away. Kids dared each other to break in on Halloween but rarely did. Even the city had given up on tearing it down after a series of accidents halted the demolition. The dispatcher sounded nervous, voice thin and crackling over the radio. Daniel knew she hated sending anyone out there. He hated going even more. Still, procedure was procedure. As he pulled up to the crumbling iron gates, his headlights pierced the mist that clung to the ground like a second skin. The building loomed out of the fog, all broken windows and sagging stone, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. Daniel keyed his radio. Unit 47 arriving at Greystone, investigating disturbance. Static. He frowned, tapping the side of the radio. More static. Shrugging it off, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the wet night. The gate stood slightly ajar, screeching on its hinges as the wind nudged it. He slipped through, boots squelching in the mud. The front doors of the asylum hung open, swaying like gaping jaws. Inside, darkness waited. Daniel clicked on his flashlight and stepped over the threshold. The smell hit him first. Damp, mold, rust, and something sour, metallic, blood. He moved cautiously, sweeping the beam of light across the ruined lobby. Torn furniture, shattered glass, old wheelchairs twisted into broken sculptures. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it crude. But here and there, older marks, symbols he didn't recognize, scrawled deep into the stone like someone had carved them with desperate hands. He called out, voice echoing, "Police! If anyone's here, show yourself!" Silence. Only the steady drip of water somewhere deeper in the building answered him. He moved forward, heart ticking faster with every step. Down the main hallway, doors gaped open like empty mouths. Shadows seemed to shift at the edge of his vision, always disappearing when he turned his head. He told himself it was just nerves. Old buildings made strange noises. Shapes played tricks on tired eyes, but that didn't explain the footprints. Bare, wet footprints appearing on the dust-caked floor leading deeper into the asylum. Small footprints, child-sized. Daniel swallowed hard and followed. The trail led to a stairwell, the metal steps rusted and sagging. He climbed carefully, wincing as each footfall echoed like a gunshot. The second floor was worse. The walls here were covered in old, peeling wallpaper stained with dark blotches. Doors lined the hallway, some hanging loose on broken hinges, others sealed tight as if afraid to open. Daniel's flashlight flickered. He banged it with the heel of his hand. It died. Complete darkness swallowed him. Breathing hard, he fumbled for the backup light clipped to his belt. The darkness moved. He felt it more than saw it. A presence brushing past him, cold and oily. When he finally snapped the second light on, the hallway was empty. But the footprints had multiplied. Dozens of them now, surrounding him, circling. A giggle floated through the air. High-pitched. Childlike. But wrong. So wrong. Daniel pivoted, sweeping the beam wildly. "Who's there?" Another giggle, closer this time. From one of the rooms to his left. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Daniel approached. The door was almost shut, only a sliver of darkness beyond. He nudged it open with the toe of his boot. The room was a child's ward, or had been once. Tiny metal beds lined the walls, rusted through, mattresses moldering, broken toys lay scattered on the floor. And in the center of the room, sitting cross-legged, was a little girl. Her dress was filthy, torn. Her hair hung in limp, matted strands over her face. She sang a nursery rhyme under her breath, rocking gently back and forth. Daniel's mouth was dry as dust. "Hey, are you okay?" She stopped rocking. The flashlight flickered again. The girl slowly lifted her head. Her face was wrong, too wide, skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Her eyes, if they were eyes, were pits of swirling darkness, deeper than any night. She smiled. Rows of two sharp teeth gleamed in the beam. Daniel staggered back, drawing his gun by pure reflex. The girl rose, her limbs jerky and broken like a puppet on tangled strings. She moved toward him, humming her cracked lullaby. He backed into the hall, heart hammering, raising his gun. "Stay back! I'm warning you!" She stepped into the light and vanished. A shriek exploded behind him. He spun around. The hallway boiled with shapes. Children, dozens of them, faces blurred and melting like wax, eyes empty sockets. They surged toward him, mouths open in silent screams. Daniel fired. The bullet passed through the first figure and slammed into the wall beyond, sending a shower of plaster dust into the air. The children kept coming. He ran, blindly, down twisting corridors, through doorways that seemed to move when he wasn't looking, past rooms that breathed with unseen life. The asylum shifted around him, trapping him deeper and deeper. He burst into the old operating theater, a cavernous room with a domed ceiling and rusted surgical tables. In the center of the room, a figure stood. An adult this time. A doctor, if the tattered remnants of the lab coat meant anything. The man's face was a ruin, stitched together with thick black thread like someone had tried to rebuild him from scraps. In his gloved hands, he held a gleaming bone saw. He beckoned. Daniel stumbled back, slipping on the slick floor. The walls of the theater bled, dark rivulets seeping from the cracks, spelling words in a language Daniel couldn't understand. The doctor took a step forward. The saw whirred to life, even though it had no power. In that moment, Daniel knew. The asylum was alive. It fed on pain, on fear. It had been starving since it was abandoned, and now it had found fresh prey. Him. The only way out was to fight, or to die. Daniel holstered his gun, useless here, and pulled the crucifix from around his neck, gripping it like a weapon. "My name is Officer Daniel Mercer," he shouted into the bleeding darkness. "I serve and protect the living, and I do not bow to the damned." The figure shrieked, recoiling. The doctor hissed, the saw sputtering. The walls trembled. Daniel ran. He sprinted down the sloping rows of the theater, up into the hall, through twisting corridors that tried to trap him. The crucifix burned in his hand, lighting the way. The children clawed at him from the shadows, their fingers icy, but he pressed on. At last he burst into the lobby. The doors were gone. Only a gaping hole remained. Outside, the mist churned, revealing the faint glow of his cruiser's headlights. He hurled himself into the night. The asylum roared behind him, a sound of inhuman rage and hunger. The ground shook. Daniel didn't look back. He tore through the mud to his cruiser, slammed the door, and fired up the engine. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 47. Mercer, do you copy?" He grabbed the mic, voice shaking. 47, I'm here. I'm clear. Send backup, now." The dispatcher hesitated. "Sir, you've been off the grid for almost 3 hours." Daniel glanced at the clock. It read 2:17 a.m. He'd entered the asylum at 2:13. He had lost hours. Or maybe time didn't work the same way in places like that. In his rearview mirror, he saw the asylum watching him. The windows like staring eyes, the broken walls like twisted mouths, waiting, hungry. He sped away, tires spinning in the mud. Greystone faded into the mist behind him, but Daniel knew it wasn't over. Places like that never let you go completely. Later that night, back at the station, he locked the crucifix away in his desk drawer and filed his report, careful not to mention anything that would get him thrown in for a psych evaluation. But sometimes, when the night was especially dark and the mist rolled in off the fields, he swore he could hear faint laughter on the wind. Childlike, broken, waiting.
Story number 10.
The first night alone in her new house, Lila Carter sat curled on the couch, a fleece blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the TV droning some mindless reality show. Boxes were still piled in corners, half unpacked from her rushed move across the country. She had loved the house during the day, bright, airy, full of charming creaks and nooks. But now, with night pressed against the windows and the nearest neighbor half a mile away, it felt different, like the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, the wind whipped around the old oak trees, making them knock against the siding. Lila jumped at every sound, even though she told herself it was normal for an old house to creak and moan. She hadn't even finished her first glass of wine when the first odd thing happened. The porch light flickered and went out. Frowning, Lila set her glass down and went to the front door, peering through the peephole. The porch was empty, just shifting shadows under the swaying trees. Maybe the bulb had gone out, she thought. Maybe the wiring was old. Still, her skin prickled. She turned back toward the living room and froze. The TV was off. She hadn't turned it off. The blanket slid from her shoulders as she approached it cautiously, remote clutched like a weapon in her hand. She jabbed the power button. Nothing. No click, no whir, no response. The power was still on. She could see the kitchen light gleaming in the background. So why? The sound of soft, deliberate footsteps came from upstairs. Lila went cold all over. She hadn't been upstairs yet tonight. The real estate agent had mentioned a creaky floorboard here and there, but this wasn't the random groaning of wood. This was movement. Someone, or something, was walking around up there. She stared at the staircase, heart pounding in her ears. Fight or flight warred inside her, and for a moment flight won. She backed toward the front door, fumbling with the lock. The footsteps stopped. A long, terrible silence stretched across the house. Then, from directly above her, 3 loud knocks. Bam! 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 Lila whimpered, twisting the deadbolt with shaking fingers. She flung the door open and stumbled out onto the porch. The wind tore at her hair and the night swallowed her in a wall of cold blackness. She didn't even think to grab her keys, her wallet, anything. She just needed to get away. But as she bolted down the porch steps, something caught her eye. Movement. A figure stood by the tree line, almost hidden by the shifting shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs too long to be human. It didn't move toward her. It just watched. Lila gasped and stumbled back inside, slamming the door and locking it. The house felt even worse now, like a trap snapping shut around her. Her phone. She dashed to the kitchen counter where she'd left it charging. Her fingers closed around it just as the screen lit up with a new notification. No caller ID. I'm already inside. The phone slipped from her hand and shattered against the tile. Above her, footsteps resumed. Faster now, like someone running from room to room. Lila grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and crouched low, listening, praying. A heavy thud came from the stairs. She squeezed her eyes shut, heart a rabbit in her chest. Another thud, and another. Whoever, or whatever, was upstairs was coming down. She forced herself to her feet, the knife trembling in her grip, and moved toward the back door. She paused only once to glance up the staircase. A shape crouched at the top of the stairs, almost blending into the shadows. It had no face, no eyes, just a blank expanse of darkness. But she felt its gaze pierce her, deep into her marrow. It tilted its head. The back door was jammed, swollen from the rain. She slammed into it with her shoulder once, twice. The thing moved. Not walking, but gliding down the stairs in a jerky, unnatural way, like a puppet whose strings were tangled. On the third slam, the door burst open, and Lila tumbled out into the backyard. The grass was wet, sucking at her bare feet as she ran blindly into the night. She could hear it behind her, no footsteps, just a sickening, skittering sound like insects crawling over glass. She tore through the yard toward the woods, ignoring the branches clawing at her arms and face. Somewhere deep among the trees, she collapsed, heart hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps. The house loomed behind her, a pale shadow in the dark, no lights in the windows, no movement. But she could feel it, the thing, watching, waiting. She huddled against a tree, clutching the knife like a lifeline. Hours seemed to pass. Maybe they did. The first light of dawn filtered through the branches, washing the world in gray. Lila finally staggered to her feet and made her way back to the house. It stood silent, innocent-looking. Inside, everything was as she'd left it, except the staircase. On each step, scratched deep into the wood, were words, "Don't leave me alone again." Lila never stayed another night. She moved into a motel that day and sold the house for a loss. She didn't care. Even now, years later, she sometimes wakes to the sound of knocking at her bedroom door. 3 loud knocks. She never opens it. She never looks. Because deep down, she knows it followed her.